Tamitakiapi, imachiapi oyate oyankapi we, chante washtea iuha nape tiuzapi. My name is Jodi A. Gillette. I did not graduate at the age of 13. But it's a good start. I am a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. My parents are Dave and Betty Archambault, who are here today in the audience. I am also of the Oglala Lakota people. My mother's enrolled there. And I have been a resident of the Dakotas most of my life. This is where I've made my home. What we have in the Dakotas is a rich diversity of Native nations. Some of the most incredible cultural teachings and lifeways are found here in the Dakotas. And I've been blessed to be able to be a part of those teachings and that surrounding most of my life. For my husband's side, the Arikara people live in North Dakota. It is the only place on the planet where the Arikara people live. It's right here in North Dakota. We also have wonderful neighbors, the Anishinaabe, at the Turtle Mountain, Chippewa. These are incredible treasures, and we're really lucky and fortunate to have such amazing diversity within our state. The history of the tribes in this state and in South Dakota go back not just a couple of hundred years, but thousands of years. Since time immemorial, we've lived on these lands. And that's something that's really special to me. The reason that it's special is because what we know about living here in this location and how we've treated this location has great significance and profound meaning, not just for us spiritually, but also for the way that we look at the people who've come recently. And that is something that is missing. So we have some very good things about North Dakota, but we also have a misstory that is a misunderstanding, misinformation, and misconception of Native peoples, not just in North Dakota, but within the whole United States. That misinformation creates a lot of confusion, and what it has done is we've developed into a society where there's a whole section of our neighbors and in our state and in our country that are invisible, ostensibly. So what I'm going to talk about are the Native Americans who were here since time immemorial. And what we know about the past and how this works into what we do in our everyday lives is I'm going to ask you to really think about this misstory that we have. And a lot of folks don't know much about the people who either still live in their states or who used to live in their states. And this is a story that has been very uniquely told throughout the ages, and it starts something like this, where when the Europeans arrived, there was a clean and bare land waiting for the settlement and of Europeans. And this is something, what it does for people like me who really see a rich diversity is it feels like we don't exist or never did. It sort of erases and takes out our ability to participate and feel like we're a part of it, because it's an erasure of our existence. In a lot of ways, this is something that didn't start with today. This is something that started a long time ago. So what I like about the map is that it shows the different peoples, and there's pictures and there's the names of what people call themselves. And that's something, it's a new map. Something like this didn't exist until recently. A young man, cartographer, put it together, and he said I could use it for this presentation. What we have is a very difficult meeting, a time that when we came together as peoples, when my nation met Europeans who were coming into these lands, there were ideas about different kinds of people across the world. And this is something that was built off of different ideas found in Europe in the 15th century, 14th century, 12th century. It goes all the way back to the Visigoths who invaded Italy. And that kind of thinking about a hierarchy of who's human and who's not found its way into the interactions between Native Americans and the earliest explorers and settlers. And so when you look at the foundations of the United States policy towards Indian tribes, it's really built on a lot of very unreasonable ideas about Indian people. And so what the word cloud has a lot of, this is just basically an analysis and an algorithm of reasons and sort of premises why Indian policy is the way it is. And you can see the bigger words are the bigger themes within here. And there's words like right and settlers and fearful, superiority, heathen. So these words all have power, and even though we don't use these words, the concepts and the foundation are very prevalent in how we look at Indian people, or how we don't look at Indian people. So if a person isn't really a person, then they didn't really live on the land and they didn't exist. And so they didn't have possessory rights, and you didn't really have to deal with them like another nation. But during this time, an interesting part of what has happened is that when Europe was coming to the United States, now the United States, they were interfacing with a lot of powerful native nations, militarily very powerful. And when the United States founding framers were looking at building a different government, they looked at the Iroquois for how to do this in a confederacy fashion, but most importantly, they looked at what they could do to get a lot of nations on their side, because in the South, the Creek were also talking to the Spanish. So there was a deliberate notion that they had to treat tribes as nations. And that can be found, the evidence of that is the Constitution. So we just look at the Constitution, and it mentions Indian tribes a couple times, and it actually calls us out as special and unique governing nations. And so there was a back and forth between, they're not really human, but we have to deal with them because the King of England, France, Denmark, Holland, the Spanish are all treating them as though they're nations. And so we're going to treat them as nations, and we're going to develop treaties. So the United States treaties actually sets out a very unique and special relationship with our people. And I actually have to do a lot of talk about how we have powers within our Indian tribes that predate the Constitution, that are older than the Constitution and predate any coming of any European to these lands. So when I say that to people in the legal community within the White House, they're often very taken aback because they don't know how old our laws are and that the United States has recognized them from the beginning. So this thinking, there's some good in the early documents, and then it's just all went away. And so nobody knows this. Like I have to read the Constitution to people to prove that actually this is the case. This is facts. This isn't something that is a fiction in my head. This is actually the law. And so we have very good things that have happened, but when the narrative starts out every time I was in school where it completely negated my existence, then there was always this sort of very ambivalent feeling that I had throughout my life about, do I exist or not? I know that there were treaties. I've been taught from the very beginning, early teachings in my life, that we have treaties, and I know that we're good people, but we don't really exist. And so what can we do to do this, to fix this, is we have to rethink. We have to rethink our history. We have to rethink the base of what we know to be true. And we want to understand how we make visible the invisible. And so while you're rethinking, one of the best things to do, because books sometimes are filled with inaccuracies, is that you have to ask, and ask questions from Native peoples, because right now, the only place that we're visible is in the mascot discussion. And this is something that I know that nationally, it just is always in the news. But it's something that, it's again, another way that whether or not we're not invisible if we have a caricature, a mascot that's honoring us, supposedly honoring us. But that's not really something that we focus on all the time, this mascot issue. The way that I look at it is it's a very flat cartoon of somebody's idea of what I am. And so it's very unfortunate that people want to focus on people, meaning the media, not people who are advocating and fighting to remove these, but the media wants to focus on this as the most important thing. And so there's also the idea that we should ask people what they think. And so that's the most important thing. So on even issues like this, you're going to have a great diversity of ideas and reactions to something like this. It's not going to be a flat, monotone message like the cartoon itself. It's going to be very rich and diverse. And so asking is going to be important. The next thing that we want to do is we want to listen. And the reason we want to listen, there's nothing on here because you have to really close your eyes if you really want to actively listen and hear what people are saying. And that's what President Obama did when he came out to the reservation in 2015, is he sat down with a group of youth and asked them questions about their lives and listened to them, and was very, very moved by what they had to say. He had developed a relationship and a connection with these young people, and what he came out of the meeting saying is that we've got to act, we've got to do. And so that's what I think the big charge of my presentation is, that we have to be active, because we can't rely on the media, we can't rely on what we learned in school, and we certainly are not going to be brought this information and dropped down from the sky. So it takes some action to understand and better understand. So listening creates a lot of work and a lot of dialogue afterwards, after you are better informed. And what the president said before and after the trip to Standing Rock was that he couldn't figure out why the media never picked up his work on Native issues, because we did a lot of awesome, wonderful things. We made a lot of progress on policy. We put a lot of old litigation behind us, just monumental changes, and nobody knows about it. And even when he'd have the entire White Horse press crew behind him, nobody would run the story. So this is like the best kept secret of the President of the United States, is he's made tremendous progress on Native issues, but nobody will run it. But what I think we can do to address that type of silence and invisibility of what we're doing, the man with the loudest microphone and the biggest platform in the world couldn't get people to pay attention to Native issues. So what do we have to do? We have to begin to share. We ask, we listen, and we begin to share what we know. We are very fortunate that we have a generation coming up who are really active, and they are doing amazing things. And I just want to talk about a few of them. Dakota Brown, he successfully advocated the changing of in California state legislature to pass a state law to ban the use of the R-skins word, or the R-skins, Redskins in California. Sophie Tiger, she continues to press for further protections for women who experience violence in Native American communities. And then Tariq Brownotter, who just put on some shoes and ran 2,000 miles to Washington, D.C. to fight for clean water in her community down in Standing Rock. And that is all happening now. And these youth are very passionate and they're very active in what they're doing. And what we all can do to support them is we can help to make them more visible. We can engage in dialogue. We can support their causes. We can do everything in our worlds, in our online worlds, or having conversations that we can to lift up and make their causes visible, because it isn't always about doom and gloom when it comes to Native nations and Indian people. There are really amazing people who are doing great things. So to recap, what I'm asking everybody in the room to do is to rethink what you know about Native people. I'm asking you to think about what you learned in history and ask questions about that. I'm also asking you to have conversations with Native Americans and doing it in a respectful and respectful way. There's nothing wrong with asking a question, and that's how you learn. The other thing is when you have a dialogue, really listen to what they're saying. And then what you learn, share with your friends and your family, because the media isn't going to bring this stuff, and how we get our information, there's a blind spot for Native peoples. So at the end of the day, we just have to remember to keep doing this, because it's not going to be brought to your attention visibly. It's very much like any issue where people are invisible, or they feel invisible and they're marginalized. So women in small business, people with children with disabilities, there's all kinds of people who feel invisible. So learning about the issue and then sharing is going to be up to us. And that way we can honor the people who've been here for thousands and thousands of years. So with that, thank you very much.